Hey there, I'm Nix, and the topic for today's video is solving the largest number at least twice of others problem on the LeetCode website. As always, solving this problem in the C++ language and giving you a detailed explanation of the entire process through the planning of the algorithm, to the coding of it, to the analysis of time and space complexity, as well as looking at LeetCode rankings. If that sounds interesting to you, then stay tuned. Welcome back. Let's dive right in. So we're given an integer array, nums, and we're guaranteed that the largest integer is unique. We want to determine whether the largest element in the array is at least twice as much as every other number in the array. If it is, we want to return the index of that largest element, or if not, we return -1. And then we're given some handy-dandy examples here. So in example 1, this array, the output is 1 because at index 1 we see a 6. And 6 is at least twice as big as every other number in the array. Example 2 is a negative result here, where the largest integer in the array, 4, is not at least twice as big because, well, the second largest is 3, and that would mean that the largest integer would need to be at least 6 in order to be able to fulfill the condition. And since 4 is less than 6, well, we output -1 as a result. And finally, example 3 is a trivial one where realistically, if we're given any one number in the array, it's going to be at least twice the value as any quote-unquote other number in the array because there are no other numbers, as the explanation says. So we output a 0 for the first index value. Looking at constraints, nothing really big jumps out at me here. We're never going to be given an empty array, but the most important thing to remember is that the largest element is, as stated here, has to be unique. Now, with all of that, 3 main sections of the code kind of jump out at me. 1, the variables that we will need to store some relevant information. 2, the for loop that's going to iterate through the array and extract out that key information that is going to be stored in those variables. And then once we have that information in those variables that we have, we're going to use them in a if-else statement. Check the condition, namely, is the largest element at least twice that as everything else in it? And then depending on whether or not that's true, we either return the index of it, or we return -1. For the variables, we're going to need a variable to store the value of the largest element. We're also going to need another integer variable to store the second largest variable, because comparing the largest and the second largest, we'll be able to figure out whether the largest value present is at least twice that of every other value. Because if that's true for the second largest, it's true for everything else in the array. And finally, in terms of variables, we'll need a variable to store the index position where the maximum element is. So 3 variables for 3 key pieces of information. Now the loop is going to handle assigning the correct values to those variables. We're going to look at each value and we're going to ask ourselves a question, is this value that we're looking at bigger than what's supposed to be our maximum? If it is, we need to do a little bit of a cascade assignment downward. Because if we ever run into a number that's bigger than what our maximum is currently, we need to first assign what our second highest value is to our max number. And then that frees up our maximum number to be assigned to the number that we're currently looking at. Finally, what we also need to do is assign the maximum index position to our current index. Now, in addition to paying attention to if the value that we're looking at is bigger than our maximum, we also have to pay attention to a situation where the number that we're looking at currently is smaller than our maximum, and it is also bigger than our second highest value. Because in that case, we don't have to worry about our maximum number, that's still going to be correct. But our second highest value is going to change to the new one, which in that case is a simple assignment. No need to change maximum value and no need to fiddle with its index either. And at the end of the loop, we'll have correct assignments for what the maximum element is in the array, what the second highest element in the array is, and what the index value of that largest element is. And with those pieces of information, we can now move on to that third section, with the third section being an if-else statement. We check if our largest element is at least greater than or equal to 2 times our second highest variable. If it is, we will return this maximum index. If it's not, we return -1. With all of that said, let's move on to actually coding that out. Okay, as stated before, here are the 3 variables that we need to care about: a maximum value, a second value, and the max index position. And I've set that all to equal 0. Now realistically, you can set this to 0 or anything smaller than what could potentially be present in the array. So 0 works, -1 works, -1 billion works, anything that is smaller than anything that you could potentially see here, or in this case 0, will work just fine. Right, now here is the for loop that does the cascade. So we want to go from the beginning of the array to the end of it. And we're going to look at if the condition is true. So in this case, we want to see if the current value we're looking at is bigger than the maximum value. If it is, we need to first set our second highest value to what the maximum value currently is. That frees up the maximum value to be reassigned to equal the number that we're currently looking at. And then we store our current index value, I, in max index. Next up is the else if condition, handling the second scenario we need to pay attention to. That if the current value we're looking at is less than the maximum value, but at the same time that value is bigger than the second maximum that we have. In that case, really simple assignment. We can just directly assign the second value to equal the value that we're currently looking at. And at the end of this loop, all 3 of these variables will house the correct information that we need. Finally, the if-else statement to determine what we return comes into play. So, if max value is greater than or equal to twice that of the second value, then we return its index. Otherwise, we just return -1. And with that, this code shouldn't have any issues running. We shouldn't see any horrible red text. Judging, okay, so 1 to 1. If we say do a custom test case and we put just one number in there, a 0, you can see that technically we are still going to get the same answer that is expected of us. Because in the code here, technically the number that we're currently looking at isn't bigger than what our maximum value, because we've already set it to 0. So this never runs. This isn't valid. The for loop essentially doesn't do anything. But the if statement here, the max value of 0, is that at least greater than or equal to twice that of the second value, which is also slated as 0? Well, 2 times 0 is 0, so 0 is equal to 0. Yes, we return max index, which also coincidentally is 0, which is the exact thing that we need to return. So even in this weird little edge case, it works. And with that, let's do the full submit, and submit myself to judgment, and I get nice green text. Excellent. Okay. Let's look at the time and space complexities before we look at the rankings. For space complexity, we're only making integer variables that takes a constant amount of space. So for space complexity, we have a big O of 1 for the answer. For time complexity, we look at the for loop here. Everything in it is doing constant time work, so it depends on the size of the array only, and thus this entire algorithm has a big O of n time complexity. Now let's look at the rankings to finish things off. Not much of a distribution here. So, moving on. And memory, very tightly bound, so not much of a distribution, which indicates that there's not too many different ways that at least people have created to solve this problem. And with that, this was how to solve the largest number at least twice of others problem. I hope you got something out of watching this video, and as always, I will wish you happy coding and to have a nice day.